Paul found himself in the role of a guardian, caring for his granddaughter Grace. Tragedy struck when a car accident snatched her away, leaving him heartbroken. The moment he gently opened her casket during the funeral, a wave of shock washed over him as he beheld what lay inside. Close to the edge of retirement, Paul had carved out a career as an automotive technician. His imminent leisure years were abruptly derailed by a family tragedy. His pride and joy was his son, who followed in his mechanical footsteps, displaying a remarkable flair for all things technical. Graduating from school with a skilled trade under his belt, he found love and companionship, leading to the birth of a precious daughter. This new family brought immense joy to Paul's life, even though the loss of his wife cast a shadow. Paul's hands were his tools of choice, and amidst his mechanical pursuits, he found solace in restoring vintage automobiles. In his son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter, he discovered a profound sense of belonging. Frequent after-school bonding with his granddaughter kindled her interest in his automotive pastime, allowing him to pass down his cherished passion. These moments also afforded him the chance to be around his son, sharing dinners and building memories as a tight-knit family. However, an unforeseen car accident shattered this contented existence. On the ill-fated day, after picking Grace up from school and immersing themselves in the garage's embrace, Paul listened to her animated retelling of her day while he tinkered on his latest project. The afternoon stretched on, and Paul slowly became concerned when his son did not arrive to pick up Grace for dinner. Trying not to frighten the sweet 7-year-old child, Paul brought her into the house and made hot dogs for them to munch on. A few minutes after they settled in the kitchen, Paul got the call he had been dreading. His son and wife had passed away in a car wreck just 2 hours earlier. Both Paul and Grace's lives changed irrevocably that day. She was orphaned, and he lost his only child. They were devastated. There was one thing that kept them both going, though, the simple fact that they had each other. Paul was over the moon to find out that he had been made Grace's designated guardian. His son had made sure to put that in writing and had written a will as soon as he became a father. So when the lawyers looked through the case, it was quite clear-cut. The parents wanted Grace to live in Paul's care. In a few short days, Paul was officially made Grace's legal guardian. After that, many changes ensued in both Paul and Grace's daily lives. She moved in with her grandfather, and as a result, she had to change schools. Paul's plans for retirement were pushed back indefinitely, and he rearranged his finances to accommodate the need to care for a child full-time. It was an impossibly hard time for them, but luckily, they had each other to lean on. Having previously lost his wife, Paul was familiar with this type of grief. Grace, on the other hand, had never lost anybody before. She needed a lot of support and reassurance from Paul, and even the community at the school banded together to help the sweet kid. All of this factored into Paul and Grace's healing journeys, and it even led them to a new tradition. Right around the time of day when Grace's parents were in the car crash, the two of them would go for walks and chat with neighbors. It was too hard for them to sit at home in the hours between school and dinner because it felt like they were reliving that day, so Paul adapted. He saw how many friends Grace was making and decided the best course of action was to lean into that camaraderie. They would go for long walks to reclaim their afternoon, and after a week, it became their ritual. No matter what, Paul and Grace went for their afternoon walks. It was on one such walk on a dark and rainy day that Grace found something that stopped Paul in his tracks. Not many people were outside that day because of the weather. Perhaps that is why Grace's ears pricked up when she heard a faint whimper. She paused, trying to be silent and listen again. A few steps ahead, Paul turned to see what she was doing. Then she walked off the sidewalk towards a cluster of bushes. Paul went over to find out what was grabbing Grace's attention and was shocked to find a small dog huddled in the foliage. It was gray and white, with matted fur and very skinny legs. Grace and Paul approached the dog as gently as they could and got close enough to see that the poor thing was malnourished and shivering. This simply felt like it was meant to be. Paul took off his jacket and swaddled the dog inside of it. Together, they brought the pup to the vet to figure out if it was a stray or belonged to anyone. The dog had no tags or chips, and it looked like it had never been groomed before. The vet assumed that it was a stray or had been abandoned long ago. Grace's fondness for the dog had grown so strong that leaving the clinic without it was out of the question. She named him Jasper, inspired by the color of his fur, a moniker he swiftly embraced. In a playful exchange, both the vet and Paul quipped that Jasper had chosen them, not the other way around. Thus, Paul and Grace's family expanded to include their new four-legged companion. Years passed harmoniously, marked by health and security. Yet, another wave of tragedy loomed. Shortly after Grace's 10th birthday, Paul granted her the autonomy to take Jasper for walks. With her responsible nature, he believed she was ready for more independence. However, the day after her celebration, an eerie quiet settled in as dinner time arrived with no sign of the pair's return. Once again, Paul found himself at home, consumed by panic and dread. Questions gnawed at him. Had Grace chosen a different route, lost her way, or perhaps lingered with friends? He fought against the tide of worst-case scenarios flooding his mind as each passing minute weighed heavier. Attempting to divert his thoughts, he set the table for dinner, waiting anxiously. Then that dreaded call arrived, confirming his fears. Grace, in a heart-wrenching twist, had been struck by a passing vehicle while tending to Jasper. A fall, a head injury, and just like her father before, she was gone. The world seemed to collapse for Paul, grief rendering him inconsolable. Compassionate neighbors familiar with his story rushed to his side, retrieving Jasper and offering support. Jasper, untouched by the incident, became both comfort and poignant reminder. A neighbor stepped in to care for the dog as Paul grappled with the news. As time passed, a funeral became necessary to bid Grace farewell. Lost in his grief, Paul played a minor role in the preparations, but he steadfastly insisted on Jasper's presence by his side. The community rallied behind this decision, offering their kindness as they sat behind him and the dog during the service. As the service drew to a close, the priest gently sealed the coffin lid. Rising to bid their farewells to Grace before the final closure, Paul and the companion by his side noticed something that left them utterly astounded. Jasper, the canine, stood on his hind legs and unleashed a barrage of frantic barks as they approached the coffin. Amidst his astonishment, Paul felt that Jasper needed to bid Grace one last farewell, prompting him to cautiously open the casket for the dog to sniff. It was at this moment that Paul's disbelief deepened. A faint yet unequivocal rhythm pulsed Paul Grace's chest. Shocked and desperate, Paul's voice filled the air as he pleaded for assistance and urgently tried to awaken Grace. The attendees, initially taken aback by his distress, transitioned Paul's shock to awe as they witnessed Grace's gradual reawakening. Revealed was the truth that Grace had been in a brief coma since the accident, her life miraculously preserved. Paul, Jasper, and Grace returned home, renewed by their second chance at shared life. A trio bound by the extraordinary, they moved ahead with the certainty that their presence for each other would endure a while longer. How would you respond if a close family member of the deceased attempted to rouse them Paul's sleep during their funeral? Share your thoughts on how you'd handle such an unexpected situation in the comments section below. Thank you.